Greetings, YouTube viewers. Today we're going to look at the Ithaca Model 51 featherweight. Ithaca 51 featherweight was manufactured from 1970 to 1985. It came in four variations, a 26, a 28, and a 30-inch barrel. This one here is a 28-inch. I also made, the fourth one was a Magnum version, a 51 Magnum. We're going to do a full disassembly and reassembly of this model today, and I'm going to show you the key areas to look for as you tear one down and inspect it. Okay, as with any gun, before you begin to work on it, we're going to make sure it's unloaded. The first thing I can notice is the magazine cup is sticking out. That tells me that the magazine is empty. Secondly, I'll pull the charging handle back, and I notice that there's nothing in the chamber. And we're ready to do the disassembly. First thing we can do is remove our handguard nut, set it aside, pull the handguard out straight off the end like that. And at this point, our barrel is ready to come out. Just give it a firm grip and pull, and the barrel comes right out. Next thing we're going to do is pull the slide back a little bit. Just grab it here on the front, pull this back, and the charging handle comes right out. We'll lay that aside. Now your entire slide assembly comes out. We'll set it aside. Next thing is we're going to take the trigger group out. Easiest way to do that is to get a plain punch, and from the left side of the receiver, just push these through like that, flip it back over. Actually, they fell out already. Here's the trigger group. There's two pins holding it. We want to make sure we keep track of those as well. So at this point, we have the gun essentially torn down for a standard cleaning that something like the owner might do, or just routine maintenance after you've been to the range. Now we're going to start disassembly of subcomponents. I'm going to take this receiver assembly and set it aside. Here is my slide assembly. To get this apart, we just take this first thing, take this little guide tube off, set that aside. Then we're going to take the bolt right off of the slide itself. To do that, pick your hand, pinch it like this. There's a little keeper clip here, if you can see that. Just catch it with your fingernail, pull it out, and then the firing pin will come out of here. I want you to note on this firing pin that there's a groove cut in it. It's kind of halfway through. When we go to reassemble this, we want to make sure that groove, if I'm holding it like this, facing away from me, the groove is facing away from me, and it slides in for that keeper pin to go through the groove, into that hole and through the groove. There we go. Yep. So now the bolt comes right off. Set these parts aside. One of the things you want to note is inside this bolt there is a nylon buffer. This buffer, you want to you can inspect it, but the recommended procedure is if you don't know the history of a gun, or if you do know the history and you know it's got 5,000 shells through it or something, change this buffer. There's also a buffer inside the receiver at the back. It's the action buffer, and there's also an action spring. Those come as a set from Diamond Gunworks, Diamond Gunsmithing out of Ithaca, New York. They're good guys. They sell that as a kit. Highly recommended. Change it every time you open one of these up, because they do wear out, and what will happen is this will eventually, from all the action, this and the one in the receiver, they crack, they break, then you start having lots of problems. In fact, that gets related to problems with this on this slide assembly. This slide assembly is known for cracking right in here, breaking, bending on both sides from being slammed back against a bad buffer and a soft spring. So it's important to inspect this thoroughly, make sure there's no cracks, no buckles. You want, if you can see on mine, it runs pretty straight lines. It's in good shape. This part is not readily available. Ithaca, you can't get them from Ithaca anymore. As I understand, I heard there was somebody forging these. Some guys take and repair them and resell them. They braze this back together, weld them up, make them like new. So they need a good inspection, and it's one of the key areas of this old Ithaca 51 that gives trouble. Okay, we can take the rest of this slide assembly apart. This push rod for the action spring. There's just a pin here in the side. I'll turn my light on again so you can hopefully see that. There's just a small pin in there, and if you just push through on that, it comes out the other side, and then the push rod comes out. There's also a plunger, a spring, and another plunger. The back plunger is a little bit longer. I don't know if you can see this here or not. I'm going to set them side by side. But turn my light on again. The short plunger is the one that goes against the push rod, and the long plunger goes into the slide assembly with the spring in between them. So those are all the components there. We'll set this aside. Okay, another thing we're going to take apart is the extractor for the bolt. It's very easy. Just kind of hold things in place, and if you come in from the bottom, I'll turn my light on so you can see that pin, and you can see it here too. It comes through the top. It's another version of this pin that held the firing pin in the buffer, or in the bolt. We're going to take and push that out now. Same process basically. Just get in here and push it through. And there's the pin for that. We take the claw out now. We want to make sure the spring doesn't go flying. It probably won't, but we don't ever want to take a chance. And that spring and plunger go in from the back here. I'm going to use this little awl and pick that out. There it is. So we've got the claw with its keeper, the plunger, and a spring, and that also the plunger and spring slide in here. We'll set this aside. By the way, just a plug for Ziploc bag companies. If you're going to have this apart for very long, Ziploc bags are cheap. Label each subcomponent if you like. So in other words, I would have everything for my bolt in a Ziploc. I find that, man, a month goes by and your parts finally come in. It's a lot less headache so that you can identify everything. Okay, so here is, once again, our slide. It looks good. We've got the bolt out of the way. Everything, it's fully stripped. Ready for the ultrasound. Give it a good cleaning. Okay, next thing we're going to do is take the gas piston off of our barrel. It's another area that needs a good cleaning, inspection. Just get a wrench on the nut on the end of this. Break it loose. Spin that off. And this comes out just like that as an assembly. We'll set the barrel away for just a moment. There's a little wire that holds this in place, and this short hook part goes into a slot here on the piston. I don't know if you can see this, but on the piston here there's a thin groove. You can see the white buffer inside that. So when we reassemble that, we want to make sure it goes through the hole on the cylinder. There's a real small hole there. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that goes in there, and this goes through and hooks that so it doesn't twist and turn as we're shooting. It actually keeps that from falling out even. So we got to make sure we are aware of that assembly. When you have this apart, look at the back of the piston face for scores, scratches, along the walls too. Make sure there's no damage. It looks good. By the way, this buffer rarely gives trouble. This one looks excellent. Probably the original. They don't give much trouble. Look inside your cylinder. Make sure it's clean. It's very common to find one of these ports, maybe both, all plugged up with carbon. You can use the wire that held the piston together and clean them out. Pipe cleaners, fine drill bit if it's really crusty, that'll give it a good clean. You can ultrasound that as well. By the way, I'm a firm believer in ultrasound. It does a great job. Okay, another area to look for on this is where the gas piston assembly bolts up. There's two ports on this barrel. The port on the right should be open, and this one is. It fell in there. Okay. And the port on the left for a standard 51 featherweight should be closed. On a 51 Magnum, that port is open. So just a little thing to keep in the back of your mind. You get one that these both are open, and it's a standard 51 featherweight. That might be a problem because it's getting excessive gas pressure through the action and can result in internal damage. You don't want that happening. But once again, clean them out, route them out, small drill bit, pipe cleaner. Give them a good cleaning. Make sure it's clear. Of course, likewise, just check your chamber. Check your on here. Check your ejector pin. It sits here on the side of the barrel, and it's back here. Make sure it's standing up some. Doesn't have to be much. This one here is only about 1/8 of an inch, but make sure it's not worn off flat, or you're going to have problems. It's not going to eject. On this one, I happened to go and dress the front edge of it so that it was a little sharper. If they got a lot of usage, that may become rounded, so you can dress that up if need be. Otherwise, give it a standard inspection. Check the ribs, make sure they're all intact, nothing's loose. The beads on the end, the muzzle's good. You know how to check barrels. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to disassemble the receiver and buttstock. One of the first things we can do is we're going to pull that spring out, and that's actually pretty easy. Ithaca likes these little clip pins, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's one right in there. It's almost hard for me to see. Let me see if I can get this closer so you can see it. It's right there. It's right in there. How we get that out is I'm going to depress the piston for the action spring, and then just lift that little, the clip kind of is held underneath, so flip it towards the front of the gun, and it just swings out. And then you can just pick it up out of there. My fingers are too fat. Hold on here. Hold on a second. Alright, I'm back. I couldn't find my needle nose pliers. So once again, I'm going to push this in and just pull that straight out. There, it came right out. And that action piston and spring come out of the receiver. Here's your piston. Here's the spring. Talk about the piston for just a moment. There's two ends. There's a flat end and an end with a cup in it. That cupped end is for this push rod on the slide assembly. It pushes into that. So when we reassemble, we want to make sure this is facing out or facing towards the front of the gun. The other end is just for holding the spring. That spring, by the way, is the one I talked about. You just always replace it. Gun comes in, you don't know any history, replace the spring, because these things get cycled so much, the spring starts to soften. Suddenly things start breaking, and we don't want that. Okay, now you can't hardly see it, but down in there, that white thing, that's the action buffer. And we're going to take that out. But in order to do that, we have to remove the buttstock. So I'm going to get a Phillips screwdriver and just push in through the buttstock and turn my screws. That one's pretty loose. We'll turn this one. I've found that if I want to be in a hurry on this, I don't have to take that buttstock completely off. Oop, thought I had that far enough. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to spin that out of the way like that. Get a 1/2 inch ratchet. Put it inside here. There's a bolt in there. Turn it. Knock her loose like that. And spin that bolt out of there. Okay, here's my bolt. Should be a lock washer, star washer, and a flat washer. We'll set that aside. Comes right out on the long tube. That's the tube that holds the spring. And we'll set the buttstock aside. Now, to get that buffer out, there's a small screw, and it's a regular head screw right there. We're going to take the screwdriver. What I like to do is kind of flip it like so, and then too many tools in the way. Move my okay, screw is out. It's a short wood screw type. Now I'm going to take my screwdriver on this side, kind of work and wiggle and get that buffer loose. And it comes out. This is a brand new one, but the old one I took out was cracked and yellow. Yeah, it was in due need of change. So this gets everything pretty well broke down. We'll talk about the trigger group for a minute. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to take it apart. They're kind of a pain. There's lots of little parts in there. We'd be another hour on trigger group. But I did replace on this one. If you can see here, light it up again, there's a couple of little ears on this. I replaced this carrier release on this one because this particular ear was missing, so I had to pick up a new carrier release. One other thing I'll talk about on this is when it comes to disassembly and assembly, this trigger group currently is in battery. I pull the trigger, it fires, hammers up. For working on them, installing it, removing it, keep it in battery. It makes it easier to put in and out because this push rod again has to set in there like that, and it can mess with you when you're trying to get things reassembled. It'll be fine once it's in place. But as far as inspection of this, make sure this spring is intact. And there's a little push rod inside there as well. Make sure that's functioning good. You can push on this, make sure that's working, and it should snap back like that. Make sure it's not bent, no cracks. The hammer again, make sure it's good, doesn't have any chips, or the shape is good on it. So pretty much so that's it. Now there is a spring, it's a little hard to see, there's a spring back here. And of course your safety. So just take it easy if you have to take it apart. I had that one apart and it wasn't fun. So not excited about doing a disassembly on that. But at the same time, I mentioned that this ear broke off. Talking to some other Ithaca people, they say that like rarely never happens. So having trouble with your trigger group is probably one of the least problematic areas of this gun. Okay, we're going to start the assembly process of this Ithaca 51. First thing we're going to do is we're going to reinsert our buffer, our action buffer. You notice it's half moon shaped, and that coincides with the concave of the receiver assembly. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it in here, and it'll go in and kind of lock in place here once we get it right. And I apologize, I can't show you real good, but you kind of have to fiddle with it. There, it's snapped in. So it's in there now. Now we're going to hold that in place, and just like when I use the screwdriver to take it out, we're going to put it back in. Make it good and snug. Don't kill it. Just get it good and snug. Kind of finger tight plus. That's good enough. Okay. So it's in place. Look in there. If you can see that, it's in there. It looks good. Now we're going to put the buttstock on. Just slide it back on there. And we'll put the bolt up in there. Actually, I'm going to put it on my, I found that if I put this on my socket like this and then slide it up in there, it's a lot easier. And it's tightening up. I'll get my ratchet. Okay, good and snug. Put my buttstock back on, line up my screws. I like to give it 5 or 6 turns and then move to the other, draw them down gently so I don't warp anything. Kind of make sure things are lined up halfway decent here. Yeah, it feels good. Give that bottom screw one last check. Okay, we're good there. Alright, so that has been reassembled. Now, we're going to put the action spring back in. Remember that we want the cup facing out, so we're going to put that on the end of the spring. And we're going to feed that in that small tube, just like that. Kind of work it as we go. I'm going to turn this around, use my left hand. I know you can't see it. Maybe if I... Hold on a second, folks. I'm going to stand this up. I want to make it so you can see what I'm doing here if I can. Shoot, bumped the barrel. Oh, wrestling snakes is not my second job. Okay, it's in. Now I'm going to take that little retainer clip, slide the straight end down, and it's got kind of a little bend to it. So I'm going to push it in, push it over, and I want to make sure it's locked in place here. There it is, it's locked. I use my screwdriver and it's locked in. So it's in now. Buffer spring and the buffer are in place. We can set that aside for a little bit. We're good on that. let's put our slide assembly back together. We're going to get the bolt. Actually, I'm going to set that aside. We'll put the bolt together first, I guess. Okay, here is the extractor claw and the spring and the little plunger. We'll put the plunger on the spring. It slides in. There, just like that. And then the claw goes in here about so. And what I like to do is when I put this pin in, I like to look in there and see daylight. Come on. Not always the easiest, but it'll go in. There we go. Just lining up the spring. Tuck it in nice and good, nice and tight. I'm going to kind of poke on that, make sure it's all the way down. Yeah. Check it for action. It's working. Looks good. Now we're going to put the bolt buffer in, and remember, it goes to the hammer or the back end of the bolt. We're going to set that. Oh, hold on. Next thing we want to do, before I do that, let's put the push rod back on the slide assembly. We want to make sure we get all the parts for that. Remember, there was two parts, two just put this in like that. The long one goes in. There's a small hole in the back here. It's going to go, yeah, I dropped it. Let's go ahead and put it in. Slap with the spring and the other plunger, the two plungers, long and short plungers. Now we're going to set this on here and put that retaining pin right in there. Well, see, and it should bounce up and down. By the way, when you do this, make sure that it's arcing across the top, not across the bottom. If it's across the bottom, you got it in wrong. Okay, so we're going to set that here. Now we're going to take the bolt. I'm going to put it on here. And mentioned before, this half cut in the back of the firing pin. We're going to push that in. And sometimes you have to wiggle this around a little bit to get it to line up. Okay, I got that in. And the little pin goes straight in, the long end goes in here. We're going to kind of twist and turn as we push that, make sure things are lined up properly. There it is, goes down, make sure it's flush with the top of the bolt. Firing pin, we can test it. It's springing and it's sticking out the front. So our slide assembly is complete. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the gas piston assembly back on the barrel. So we've got the nut, a little retaining wire pin, the piston and the cylinder. We'll put the piston and cylinder together, and I'm going to find that little hole where that wire goes. There's the hole. And I'm going to make sure that the groove in the side of the piston lines up. I'm going to put that in. There we go. Now, on the back of the barrel, or on the where this connects, there's two guide pins here. There's one right here and one right here. We want to make sure those line up with the holes on each side of the piston. Not the gas ports, those will line up down there, but the guide pin holes. So we hold this all as a unit, put the bolt part in, wiggle around, and it should snap up and go flush. This should be in, this shouldn't come out. If we've passed all those tests, put the nut on it. wiggle, kind of wiggle and snug. Test this again, it seems good. We're going to get our wrench, we're going to snug this up. Good and snug, okay? Alrighty, we've got all that done. Now we're ready to assemble the gun. So first thing we're going to do is we'll get our receiver assembly, set it here. And then we get our slide assembly. We'll put this little guide tube on the front, like so. And we're going to slide this in. Put this guide tube goes over the bolt, the front handguard bolt goes across that. And then I like to turn it upside down like this, and then I get something simple. I'll use my needle nose. I'll pick that push rod up and I'll put it in that cup in the back of the action piston, just like that. If you can see that, it's in there. And I'll just work it back and forth a little, satisfied it's connecting. Next thing I'm going to do is get my trigger group. Oh, hold on. First thing I want to do is put my charging handle in. I'll pull it back just a little bit, and it just snaps in. You should feel it drop in place. Now that won't give me any trouble. Okay, now my trigger group should just drop in. There's 2 pins. Kind of line it up. You should be able to see it halfway decent. Front one's in, rear one's in. Now, if you want, you can actually test the gun. Okay, I'm not going to let it pop forward freely, but that's working. I'm going to bring it back, and we're going to put our barrel on. We'll take the barrel, slide it on, line that. If you can see here on the end of the barrel, there's a hole that goes over that bolt in the front. Put that on. Make sure our receiver, the end of our barrel, the chamber is snug against the receiver. And we take our handguard. We'll put that on. We will snug that down. Now we can, she's ready to shoot. I've got a dummy cartridge here. By the way, I made this. A little hot glue in the end, and a 5/8 dowel rod is glued inside. These are just 2 3/4 inch spents. And it kicks it out. We're ready to go shooting. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.